Hello, and welcome to Accelerate Your ASM Journey, Top 10 Attack Surface Management Use Cases. Today's webinar is sponsored by Palo Alto Networks and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm here from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now next, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to 4 resources from Palo Alto. We have the 2022 Attack Surface Threat Report, a PDF with insights for CXOs on their ASM journey, a SOC guide to ASM, and a guide for scaling your SOC with Cortex. So check those out now and feel free to share them with colleagues. At the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can also be found in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look through all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today from Palo Alto Networks. We have Juliana, who's a technical engineer, and Abhi, who's a product marketing manager for Cortex Xpanse. So now I'm going to turn things over to Abhi to get us started.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Abhi. I'm a product marketing manager for Cortex Xpanse. Today, we have our technical expert, Juliana Sturma, with us to discuss a little bit about the top 10 use cases for attack surface management. But before we do that, we need to talk a little bit about attack surface management. Why even worry about your attack surface? Well, over the past few years, remote work and the aggressive move to the cloud have scattered your critical IT infrastructure all across your environment. We're talking about dev environments, database storage systems, file transfer systems, and many others have been scattered throughout the globe. And what this has done is it has created really big challenges for your security team. They are held back by limited visibility. If you do not know all the different assets that you own, it's going to be extremely challenging to protect them. It is also extremely difficult for them to act on alerts because they're unable to identify which business units these belong to, who are these owners. And this is extremely pronounced when you have a new 0-day or a new CVE that's published. At this time, every second counts, and if you do not understand your exposure to this potential vulnerability, it's going to be extremely challenging to respond. Additionally, all of these makes it extremely difficult for them to prioritize risks that they need to remediate. And because of all of these challenges, your attackers have new opportunities. Our research indicates that extremely large organizations have one new serious exposure on the public internet every 12 hours. And if you look at attackers in 2022, against most published remote code exploits, they were beginning to scan for vulnerable assets within minutes. And if you look at some of the customers that we worked with, initially when Xpanse begins to work with these prospects, about 30 to 40% of their entire environment is unknown to them. As a consequence, you can see how these challenges for your security teams become extremely impossible to handle. So what can you do about this? Well, you can do one of two things. One, You can build an extremely manual inventory of all of your different assets, email all of your local teams and different business units to try and collate a single source of information for all of the different assets that you own. And you could also build out a program to ensure that if a new asset is created, you have centrally visibility into it. And if you manage to do all of these things, you then have the big problem of trying to prioritize these assets, figure out which one is a problem and which is okay to be exposed. Or you could simply use Xpanse, because Xpanse helps you automatically find and fix your exposures before attackers can exploit them. And Xpanse does this to 3 key capabilities. Number 1 is active discovery. Xpanse scans the global internet multiple times during the day, finds all of the different exposed assets that belong to your organization, and using our proprietary active learning technology, which is a machine learning algorithm that is supervised by a team of analysts, we are able to accurately attribute all the different assets that we found on the public internet that specifically belong to your organization. However, this is only part of the solution. We go out into the internet, we find all the different assets out there, and off this set, we find ones that belong to your particular organization. And then, with our new active response module, we can automatically help you fix these exposures. And for a solution to be able to deliver on the promise of attack surface management, it needs to satisfy 2 key things. One is active discovery, and the 2 is active remediation. What I mean by active discovery is the ability to find all of your assets and exposures that are on the public internet. If you look at the market, there are some products that can do this. However, they're only offering you half a solution. They're discovering if they're able to discover your assets on the internet, and then they're making it your security team's problem to go out and fix these exposures. However, like I said, if you want to deliver on the promise of attack surface management, you have to find these exposures and also actively fix them. And with the launch of our new active response module, we do just that. We automatically find all of your exposures and then automatically fix them for you. What this means is if you use one of those attack surface visibility tools that are available in the market, it takes your team anywhere about 4 to 5 hours to just do the initial investigation and then understand who this asset belongs to and what you need to do with it. However, with our active response module, because all of this is automated, we can do this in about 3 minutes. And if you look at the entire life cycle, we've worked with customers across different industries, and when we polled them on how much time it takes for them to find these exposures, find these owners, find these business units, and then fix them, it takes them anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks. And as we spoke about in the earlier slide, attackers are on a minute timeline, whereas defenders are on a week timeline. However, with our new active response module, we can bridge that gap. Using this new module, you can respond to your exposures in about under 5 minutes because it's completely automated. Now that we've seen how active attack surface management can help your organization, let's bring in our technical expert, Juliana, to talk about all the different ways customers are solving problems with Cortex Xpanse. Juliana, thank you so much for being here. One of the things I read on the internet was how bad actors are buying and selling RDP instances, which are then being compromised to deploy ransomware. Can attack surface management help with this at all?
Thanks, Abhi. That's a great question. So yes, we do see that RDP is one of the most common attack vectors for ransomware, and Xpanse helps with that. So if we take a look now at the Xpanse console and we dive into our incidents here, we can actually see that RDP servers is one of these incident types we found. And so because this is such a big problem, we've automatically started deploying a playbook, and the user can go in here and see these different options. And the first option here, automated remediation by restricting open ports, means that we can actually go back into this customer's AWS instance and restrict ports at the API level, taking that RDP server offline and within seconds remediating that issue.
That's incredible. So we cannot just find these RDP exposures that an organization might have on the public internet, but we can actually automatically deploy a playbook to take them offline. But when you look at it, a lot of these RDP instances are present in the cloud. And you and I both know that it's incredibly easy to deploy a cloud asset. All you need is a credit card and an email address. So how would somebody go about using attack surface management to essentially clamp down shadow IT or rogue IT in their environment?
Right, so shadow IT is another major use case for Xpanse. So here we are looking at the asset inventory of this organization. And what I've done is pulled up a list of all of the services here that are not hosted in AWS, Google, Azure, or on-prem. So let's say that the organization's policy allows for those four types of hosting. This will actually just pull up a list of any shadow IT that is outside of those hosted platforms.
That makes a lot of sense. You can essentially figure out how many of your services are running in a sanctioned provider versus an unsanctioned provider, and essentially bring those unsanctioned assets under management or take them off the internet. But what about when there is a new zero-day or a new CVE that's being published? We see organizations often scramble because they don't know if they have any exposure to this particular zero-day. Can ASM help in this in any way at all? And have you seen any examples of that?
Great question. So we see that security teams really struggle to respond quickly to 0 days. So in Xpanse, we have over 500 policies that we are continually updating based on new CVEs that are released and 0-day vulnerabilities. So here we are in the console looking at our attack surface rules, and you can see over here how frequently these are updated. So for example, this very recent VMware ESXi server that was an exposure, customers could use Xpanse to see if they had any of those exposures on their attack surface. We also had policies in place for Microsoft Exchange Server and Confluence before those high-profile CVEs even were released. And so this is a great way for customers and organizations to stay on top of new CVEs or 0-day vulnerabilities as they're released. And I'll show you too, we can then take a look at the network and see if you have any instances of those servers on your attack surface. And so here we see that this organization does in fact have a number of insecure Microsoft Exchange servers. And so this helps to kick off that triage process to investigate further.
That's incredible. So instead of emailing all of your teams at odd times in the night, you can just at the click of a button see if you have any exposure to these new 0 days. These policies, you said there are well over 500 different types of policies on the console. But let's say if there's a new 0-day, what happens then? Does the customer have to write their own policy? Does the Xpanse team build out a new policy? How does that work?
So we actually have a team of researchers that are constantly staying up to date with policies so that we can write new ones in and allow our customers to react to those. So in the attack surface rules, you can go in here, change the severity of one of these to mark it as critical, high, or low. You can also enable or disable here. And same thing in your incidents queue, you can go in and change the status. If it's under investigation, you can also change the assignee and assign it to yourself or someone else to get that process started.
That's awesome. One of the common questions we get from prospects is this a replacement for my vulnerability management program? Can you talk a little bit about, is this a replacement or is this something else?
Right, so vulnerability scanners are great, but they only look for your known assets. And so Xpanse helps discover everything that's unknown. And so for example, here we are in your asset inventory looking at all of your assets here. We see all different domains, certificates, different asset types that we've found attributed to your organization. And we can also find non-standard port usage. So that's another common way that attackers are finding exposures. And here we see an example where we can look at all of your services for HTTP servers and filter out standard ports of 80 and 443, for example, to pull up a list of those servers that might be misconfigured or might be more ripe for targeting.
Right, so basically traditional vulnerability scanners just fail when it comes to the cloud because they tend to be IP-based. And so with the Xpanse data, would they be able to use it in their VM scanner in some way?
Yes, so we provide that broader coverage and ROI because we do look for, we have more comprehensive discovery and can look at all cloud assets.
That's great. One of the most common ways we see attack surfaces growing or shadow IT in any organization is through mergers and acquisitions. And given that there's been an incredible amount of M&A activity in the market, can attack surface management help in wrangling this mergers and acquisitions input as it relates to a growing attack surface?
Right. So M&As bring up a lot of challenges for organizations because there are all of those historical assets that they might not know about, or maybe with ongoing acquisitions. And so with Xpanse, again, we help to find all of those and centralize visibility into your asset inventory. So for example, if you have a new subsidiary or if you've just acquired a new company and you want to take a look at all of those assets that were previously managed under their ownership but are now attributed to your organization, we can go in here and apply this filter. Here, for example, we're looking at Acme Supply business unit, and this will filter down these results and pull up a list of assets that just belong to that business unit. So you can go in and further investigate those.
So all of this is completely automated. Let's say if we buy a company tomorrow, and if I want to know about their attack surface, Xpanse can map this particular business, and then you would see it within your console?
Yes, absolutely. We are continuously monitoring and able to pull in that data very quickly for you.
I can see that being extremely useful to security organizations that are struggling to basically integrate these new organizations under their existing security posture. So one of the other use cases that often come up is that some companies, even though they have an extremely good security posture, they tend to have really high cyber insurance premiums. Could attack surface management, in some sense, given that it helps them proactively manage risk and reduce risk, help bring down cyber insurance premiums?
Right. So those cyber insurance ratings are looking at your risk profile. And with Xpanse, we help you reduce that risk profile, fix your security blind spots. And so it's a great way for organizations to be able to lower those premiums. So if we go into the attack surface compliance dashboard, we can see NIST framework here and all of the results pulling up tied to that. And so, for example, access control, this organization has an extremely high number of alerts here, over 7,000. And with Xpander, we can help you bring that number down. And that's how you would take this information to your cyber insurance provider and refute your risk scores to bring your rates down.
That's incredible. So attack surface management doesn't just help you increase your ROI on your existing tool spend by being a complement to your VM program, but can also reduce your cyber insurance premium by helping you reduce overall risk. Now that is great. However, let's talk about a really bad incident, right? Let's talk about the time when you have to activate your cyber insurance premiums. Let's say there's an incident in your environment. Say you are breached and you do have to activate your cyber insurance premiums, right? Can Xpanse help with incident response in those scenarios?
Right. So we see a lot of organizations using Xpander to take a look back at incidences where they may have been breached and dig into what the cause of that was. So here we are seeing the incident management dashboard, and this shows you current incidents and incidents that are open. But if we go into your incident response and we take a look at incidents, we can filter by resolved, and this will pull up a list of incidents that have been resolved, and you can go into these, drill down, and look at source information, the assets, the underlying data here as well.
That would be extremely useful to security teams. Now, we've spoken a great deal about the breadth of different use cases that attack surface management can help with. We've spoken about, I think, roughly 6 or 7 different problems that we can solve. And we speak a lot in terms of finding these assets or exposures on the internet. But what about the content running on them? If they're insecure, can attack surface management potentially help identify what's running on them and if there's any issues with that particular content?
Yes, so this is a really powerful capability of Xpanse where we are now crawling website data, and so we can look at that content of your websites. And so I'll show you what that looks like if we go into our web ASM dashboard here. So this is a high-level overview of your server software, sites using HTTP, your top best practices that your websites are failing, as well as newly added web resources, third-party domains hosting linked code, and privacy-impacting packages your sites are using. So then we can also go and look into your websites under your asset inventory. So drilling into the content on your websites, we can take a look at one of these examples, and we see a screenshot with the timestamp here. We see that this website has failed a few important security best practices. And then we also run a search on technologies used, also do any form analysis of your HTML, third-party resources. So in the example of an e-commerce site that has a payment portal or a login page, you can see how this would be really valuable to make sure that there are no broken encryption methods there.
So I can see how this would be extremely beneficial, right? We are pinpointing areas in your network that are critical for for revenue generation. If something is broken or insecure, as in the e-commerce example, we can identify that and then alert the appropriate team such that they can fix that particular exposure. We've spoken at length about all the different things that attack surface management can help you identify. You recently covered in depth about not just finding these different assets, but going into them and then figuring out what's running on them and if there are any insecurities in those. Is there any use case or a problem that attack surface management solves that you found surprising in your time working with all of these different customers?
So we've seen organizations facing challenges securing their OT or their operating technology systems. For example, with a hospital, if attackers get access to their building access control systems, it could cause major disruption, power outages, shut down that entire facility. And so we've seen that as an example with not just hospitals, but also power plants and other facilities. So for example, BACnet is one of the attack surface rules that we have in place, and we have a policy to help ensure compliance around that.
That's extremely terrifying to realize that there are these systems that were originally built without security in mind that are now exposed to the public internet, that in the hands of a bad actor, or when you think about some of the examples you gave in the case of power plants and energy grids, if a nation-state actor really wants to do some terrible thing, they could easily do that if an organization has a poorly misconfigured BACnet server or any sort of building control management system. But if they had an attack surface management program, they can identify these exposures and potentially bring them under their existing security controls. So speaking about healthcare and oil and gas plants, these are some of the most heavily regulated industries. And so they all have to satisfy a certain level of compliance ratings to basically operate in a safe and secure manner for their customers. And so is there anything that attack surface management can do as it relates to helping these companies be compliant? Because I'm assuming having a critical building control system exposed to the public internet is not very compliant behavior.
Yes, so we map your assets to these different compliance frameworks. So you see here we have NIST and CMMC, 4 different frameworks here that we help you ensure compliance with. And so this is a great way for you to stay up to date and make sure that you are compliant.
Right, so with basically a click of a button, an organization can find out if they're in violation with any of the compliance certifications that they possess. That's extremely helpful. So we've seen a lot of different problems that attack surface management can help with. And you worked with a great many customers across industries on their attack surface management program. Can you talk to us about some of the outcomes that an attack surface management program has driven for these customers?
So one example is working with a Fortune 100 healthcare company. They were experiencing cloud sprawl across 10 to 15 different providers that they didn't even know about. And so you can imagine the challenge this posed in giving them visibility into their different cloud providers and certificates and domains. And so working with us, we helped to reduce their issues by 70%. And we also overall saw a 14% decrease in their attack surface due to decommissioned assets. So really helped turn things around for them and help clean up their attack surface.
So basically helping them address some of the key challenges that we went over early on in this conversation. So what about the financial services industry? They are often targets of choice for bad actors. How are they using attack surface management?
So this particular company in financial services, they wanted to take a deeper look at their ransomware exposures. So we found that 77% of their assets were completely unknown to them. We also remediated 4,000 issues in just 3 months, including a number of RDP instances and also telnet servers.
77% of their network, so nearly 2/3 of their network they did not have visibility into. And with Xpanse, they were able to gain that visibility to bring all of these assets under management. That's incredible. Can you give us one more example of a customer outcome that you've seen once they adopted attack surface management?
Sure. So construction is another industry where we see a lot of challenges. With this particular customer, 14% of the exposures found in their cloud were unmanaged. And so we helped bring that under management for them. 51% of their public-facing assets in AWS were also unknown to the company, and they didn't have any Prisma Cloud coverage. So that's a really powerful integration that we have with Prisma Cloud to help bring those cloud assets under management. And we were able to help reduce the risk of a data breach for them and discover 28% of assets that they didn't know about.
That's awesome. One of the common themes that I see is that attack surface management doesn't just help one team in a security organization, but it helps them across their entire security operations center. We've spoken about how it helps vulnerability management. You have spoken about how it helps with cloud security management. So is attack surface management normally something that is mostly managed by one team, or do you see this sort of a tool that's being used by multiple teams within an organization's security initiative?
You hit on a great point there, and we see a lot of teams using Xpanse to manage their attack surface. Security teams, we have analysts all the way up to vulnerability management professionals, and all the way up to CISOs who are looking at this data and reports and using it to help manage their attack surface.
Juliana, thank you so much for being here and walking us through all of the different problems that attack surface management can help us solve.
Thanks for having me.
Now that you know all of the different problems and use cases that can be solved with an attack surface management solution, you're wondering why choose Xpanse? Well, Xpanse protects the largest and the most attacked network in the world. The Department of Defense has chosen Xpanse to supercharge their attack surface management program. Additionally, if you're looking for an attack surface management solution, you need to make sure that your solution can do two very important things. And that is actively discover all of your exposed assets. And the second thing is actively resolve these exposures that it has now found. If you look at the market, many solutions that are out there do some form of discovery, but that is only part of the solution. Sometimes these solutions essentially push this data through an integration to some kind of ticketing platform. But the answer to resolving your attack surface risks does not lie in more IT tickets, it lies in automation. So with the active response module from Cortex Xpanse, you can automatically resolve these exposures on the public internet. Xpanse is also trusted by some of the world's largest and most demanding organizations. Like I said before, the Department of Defense, which comprises of 8% of the global internet, chooses Xpanse. Xpanse also protects all 6 branches of the US military. We also secure every US nuclear weapons lab. Additionally, some of the biggest financial organizations, banks, manufacturing companies, and others trust Xpanse to protect their attack surface. And we're also validated by your peers and the industry. In the inaugural GigaOM Attack Surface Management Evaluative Report, Xpanse was the only leader and outperformer. And if you go to Gartner Peer Insights, we are the most highly rated vendor on Gartner Peer Insights. You can read all about us from our customers who are actively using Cortex Xpanse to manage their attack surface. Thank you so much for joining us and learning about all the different ways attack surface management can help you proactively reduce risks. If you'd like to learn more about us, please visit the link on the screen.
All right, Abhi, that was a great conversation with Juliana and nice demos. Are you ready for a few more questions? All right, so I've got a few, and everyone, this is your chance to get answers about attack surface management and Palo Alto's approach as well. So type those into the console. This first one, Abhi, how is ASM different from security rating?
Yeah, we get that question a lot of times, and the answer really is they address two very separate use cases. If you think about security ratings, you normally need to have some sort of security rating so that you can go to your cyber insurance provider and they can use that to price your cyber insurance premium. It gives you a broad overview of your security posture. When it comes to attack surface management, what we do is provide a near real-time visibility that is continuous into your attack surface so that you can proactively prevent incidents from happening. So one has more of a daily use case and application across your entire SOC workflow, whereas the other one is more so for compliance purposes.
Okay. All right. No, that makes a lot of sense. In the demo, just the catalog of vulnerabilities was incredible. What's the source for that? Do you guys just monitor what's coming out in terms of vendor alerts and security alerts?
Yeah, we use several sources, and we also have a research team that's actively looking at several sources of data, not just in terms of what is vulnerable, but we also enrich that using what has been actively exploited in the wild. And it is based on that that we decide to build out these fingerprints and these policies that you saw on screen. I think we have well over 500 of those to basically help you pretty much at the click of a button understand if you have any exposures particular to that new CVE or 0-day that's been published.
That's a fantastic resource within the product. There was some mention about internet-facing assets. What are internet-facing assets?
I think that's a broad term, but the way I think about internet assets and the way the attack surface management industry thinks about internet-facing asset is basically if you have any sort of asset in your environment that is exposed to the internet that helps you generate revenue on a daily basis that is extremely critical to your operations, that is what we would term as an internet-facing asset. Some examples of these would include things like your domains and subdomains list, your list of IP ranges that you own, all the different certificates that are there in your environment. It could also include things like your database servers. We have seen instances where organizations, because of some kind of accidental misconfiguration, have exposed entire MySQL databases to the public internet, which contain critical customer information. This could also be things like your file transfer systems, things like FTP and Telnet, which are an absolute no-no because a lot of the information that passes through these two services are unencrypted, and these are legacy systems. In fact, there are actually regulations which stipulate that you shouldn't have any FTP or Telnet servers in your environment. But we see lots of organizations, on account of just backlogged repairs and a lack of visibility, continue to use things like FTP servers and Telnet servers that we're able to identify and work with the organization to take off the public internet. So basically, any sort of IT infrastructure that you're using to generate revenue is what we would call internet-facing asset.
Okay. All right. Super. In one of those last slides there, you were showing, active response modules. We've got an audience question about what playbooks are available in active response modules and what do they do?
Yeah. So active response module is pretty revolutionary, and we don't want to say that because it's our product, but we do think it significantly alters the attack surface management conversation, purely because if you look at the attack surface management without the active response module, you mostly see several vendors and solutions that help you understand your exposures. While that is valuable, all they're doing is just complaining and then telling you, here's all the things that are broken in your network, now you go fix it. But with the active response module, we've realized that a lot of these issues can be fixed automatically. And that's what we do. We automatically deploy playbooks to find that exposure and then go ahead and take it off the internet because we know how to do it. We have seen this across several customers, and we've used that know-how to build out these playbooks. And right now, we have about 7 or 8 different use cases we can address. The number one thing that we spoke a little bit about on the demo there was about resolving your remote desktop protocol exposures. Now, this is something that helps you remotely connect into a device or system and then perform your tasks and responsibilities. We can see how this is extremely helpful in light of everything that's been happening over the last 3-4 years. However, it should be safe and be used with a VPN and with two-factor authentication. But because of lots of reasons, we see these exposed to the public internet. And if a bad actor stumbles on this, then they can obviously use it to remotely connect into your systems and environment and do very bad things. So we can stamp out RDP. We also have several other playbooks. We have one to understand if you have any exposure, SNP exposures. So these are basically protocols that connect different routers, switches, and other networking infrastructure. Now, these should not be exposed to the public internet because you don't want a bad guy to be running IT for your computers. So if we find any of these on the public internet, we can go and understand them, and using our integrations into AWS, GCP, and Azure, we can take them off the internet. So there's a fairly long list. If anybody here wants to learn more about them, you can go to our blog, and we have a list of all the different playbooks that are available within Active Response module.
That sounds really cool. And I have a sort of a follow-up question on that. So, with the idea of a playbook, is there, you know, customer action related to the playbooks? Like, are they following a few steps that are built in, or is a lot of it automated to stay in front of an attack? I mean, how does that work?
So it's all automated. There is the ability to customize these playbooks, but if you are an Xpanse customer, you'd have to work with your customer success representative to essentially fine tune this to your organization. But more often than
Hmm.
not, these are pretty much out of the box. There's no configuration required. Once you have Xpanse and you have the active response module enabled, once we see an RDP instance out on the public internet and we're able to accurately identify it as belonging to your organization, we can go ahead and then automatically deploy a playbook to do two simple things. The number one is we can obviously gather additional context in terms of which business unit this belongs to, who is the owner, where does this lie? Does it lie in a dev environment or a prod environment? Now, that's just something that we're going to do irrespective of whether you tell us to do it or not, just because that is a lot of investigative work that we can do for the analyst. The second piece is where the analyst has an input in terms of what they want to do with all of this information. Now, if they realize that this is in a test environment and they want us to resolve it, they can simply go ahead and say automatically resolve. We will go into whichever service provider that particular asset lies in, whether it's AWS, GCP, Azure, and then basically block those ports or change the security group settings to make sure that this is not exposed to the public internet. If they don't want us to do that, they still have all of this enrichment investigation that is automatically done for them.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, that's great. And I guess a last question there, on these active response modules, do analysts go in and deploy them manually? Like, do you have to select, I want these active response modules to be in effect, sort of to be enabled, or do they sort of, are they triggered automatically by events?
So there's two things. The first portion, the investigation and the enrichment piece, so that's triggered pretty automatically, but we
Yeah.
don't change anything in your network without your input. So when I say it can automatically remediate things, we will automatically enrich, do the investigation for you. After that, there is a click of a button wherein we give you the option of telling us if you want us to go and resolve it or if you will do it yourself. So it's twofold. The first portion is done automatically. The second fold, the analyst still has an input on it.
Smart. That's great. Okay. And what about, you mentioned VM programs a bit in the conversation earlier. Is this a replacement for a VM program?
Yet another question that we get fairly often. This is not in any way a replacement to a traditional VM tool. However, this is a huge complement to your traditional VM program purely because a VM tool is normally IP based. And when it comes to the cloud, they fail miserably because cloud IPs tend to change pretty dynamically. So by the time your VM tool can scan the particular IP, the asset has moved on, and there's really nothing on that IP for you to scan and understand if it's vulnerable or not. However, we have seen lots of organizations. One example is this really large consulting company that we worked with. Their cloud scanning on their VM program was extremely suboptimal. They were only able to scan about 20% of their active cloud assets using their VM tool. However, with Xpanse, they used their domain host name pairs from the data that Xpanse has discovered, and they were able to feed that into their VM tool, which then actively resolved this into IP addresses which had assets and services running on them. And that helped them take their cloud VM scanning accuracy from about 20% to about 65%. So that just increased their cloud VM scanning coverage.
Gotcha. You know what? It looks like we're running we're running a little bit low on time here, but there is the link on the screen. If somebody wants to get started or find out more, what can they find out from the link here, and how do they get started with you guys?
Yeah, basically, if they go to that link on the screen, they learn a lot more about Xpanse. But more than that, if somebody is convinced that they want to deploy an attack surface management solution in their environment, one thing they can do is they can go there. We have a form that they can fill out. And what we can do is we can bring a view of their attack surface to that first demo, purely because to deploy Xpanse, you don't need any agents or installation. It's a cloud delivered service. It's completely SaaS. And because we can look out into the internet and observe all the different assets that are out there, let's say you're Coca-Cola and you come to us and say, "Hi, I want to get a demo of Xpanse." To the very first meeting, we can bring a snapshot of your attack surface that we see publicly exposed on the internet.
Gotcha. Super. All right. Well, Abhi, thank you so much. And thanks to Juliana as well for just putting together a really informative presentation and for all of your insights here in the Q&A. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you for all these great questions.
All right, and before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card today is Donna Taylor from Arkansas. So congratulations to Donna. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Palo Alto for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.